Great. And welcome again, everyone. Glad that you're all here. As usual, we start these meetings acknowledging and pointing people's attention to the intellectual property rights policy that IMS has in place that helps protect the integrity of and the openness of the specification documents that we produce. And as part of that intellectual property rights policy, we're asked to read this following statement. You can find the whole policy published at imsglobal.org/IP. At this time, I'd ask that those present please inform me if you're personally aware of any claims under any patent applications or issued patents that would be likely to be infringed by an implementation of the specification or other work product that's the subject of this meeting. You need not be the inventor of such patent or patent application in order to inform us that a claim might exist, and there is no penalty for expressing a belief that turns out to be inaccurate. And if you'd rather discuss IP, patent-related questions, or any concerns or information you'd like to share and do it outside of this meeting, you can contact me or any other IMS staff member directly at any time. IMS also has a participation agreement in place. It's published at imsglobal.org/PA. Essentially asks that details of the documents we're developing together or discussions we're having not be shared outside of the membership of this group. So our agenda today is to continue what we did last month, and where we saw a demo of how LTI Advantage has been implemented and is working in practice. We have Blackboard, Turnitin, and Cengage providing a demonstration today. And then we'd like to open up some time to discuss that as questions arise, or there's a time at the end to discuss what you've just seen. We want to encourage you to pose questions. You can do that in the chat. You can raise your hand and we can have a discussion throughout the presentation or at the end to the preference of those doing the demo. And then as we've opened up a forum to be able to collect questions in advance of the meeting or throughout the month as you're thinking about LTI Advantage and have issues that you'd like to raise or topics to consider for these roundtable sessions. So we have a couple of questions that we'll try to get to as well that have been submitted throughout the week. So let's begin. I guess over to you, Eric or Wade.
Yeah, I'll start. This is Eric Preston with Blackboard. We're going to start today this is kind of more of an in-depth into using LTI Advantage with Blackboard. The last few roundtables, we've been talking about LTI Advantage at a high level and some kind of high-level demos. Today, we decided to start with at least kind of how it would work in real life with Learn, and we'll do the other LMSs as the weeks progress. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try to, because I've never done this before with Zoom. So how is that working for everybody?
Looks good.
Okay. So first I'm going to just go through the LTI Advantage primer that Claude put together in case there's people new here. I'll go really fast. If people want to stop me, that's fine. Where's my Zoom? Right there. So just shout out. I just wanted to go through this real quick. So, excuse me. So LTI Advantage is 4 specifications. It's the core specification, which we've versioned at LTI 1.3, that allows you to launch an LTI link from a platform to a tool, where a platform is generally some LMS or VLE, learning management system, or virtual learning environment. And then there's 3 companion specs, which are the deep linking UI flow to get content into the course outline, names and roles provisioning service to get the membership course roster, and then last but not least, assignment and grade service that allows you to get at grades, create line items, update line items, managing grade columns and scores. We use asymmetric keys for our security mechanisms. So the tool generates a private public key set, the LMS generates a private public key set, and we don't exchange the private keys, we exchange the public keys, and we sign messages between each other with the private keys, the respective private keys, and we validate them with the respective public key. This is how browsers and lots of other standard API integrations work today. The messages are, the launch messages that we send from a platform to a tool are OpenID formatted messages. The reason we use OpenID is because it is already a standard specification for how to identify who a message is coming from in a standardized format, which is a JWT or JSON web token. We can sign these things easily with our keys, and we can pass them over the internet in a nice, easy way. So there are the reason why we use JWT and OpenID and OAuth 2, which we'll get into, is because there are existing libraries for all the major programming languages out there, so you're not writing thousands of lines of encryption code. With OpenID, you've got 3 players in the picture. You have the platform, which is a server, you have the tool, which is a server, and you have the browser in the middle, which we all know and love. But with that comes security issues around people hijacking the session, people stepping in, interrupting the launch flow, and potentially doing malicious things. And so to get around that, we've implemented the OpenID authentication mechanism for third-party sign-in requests. So that's all, again, part of a standard specification. This diagram shows what's going on here. Mostly you don't need to worry about that as a tool developer. You need to know a little bit about it as a tool developer, because you're going to get a login request, you're going to redirect back to the platform, and then you're going to get your LTI launch. You then need to make sure it came from the person who initiated that login request. And that's how you don't suffer cross-site request forgery attacks in an LTI launch. We use OAuth 2 for a tool to get access to services, to resources from the platform. The resources are the users and their grades. So we're using standard OAuth 2 mechanism to do that. You need to make a request to an OAuth 2 token service that will give you a token, which is in a JWT format. And then when you make the request for the resource, whether it's a list of users or whether it's a grade for a user or to create a grade column, you pass that token along as your authentication mechanism. That token is then validated, and then you have access to those resources. So again, standard security mechanism, nothing new that you have to learn, or that you haven't already done with many other service APIs. LTI defines different scopes, so you can either read the grades, but you might be able to write the grades. So you can restrict access on different levels. And LTI supports multi-tenant hosting. So if you are a platform that is at a university, but supports multiple universities, a tool can know which university it came from through this thing called a deployment ID. So each time you deploy a tool at an institution, or even as part of an institution, maybe the biology department versus the chemistry department, each of those deployments has its own deployment ID and is associated with basically an account, a billing account that the tool needs to know about. So we've thought about how does a tool know who is launching and down to individual departments. And then, as I mentioned, there are 3 services, and we'll look at each one of them. There's the deep linking flow, where you make an LTI launch to a tool, but part of that launch is not just here's some data. Part of that launch is here's some data, and I want you to provide a UI where you can select content that I'm going to stick back in my course outline and display in my UI. And so we'll look at examples of how that works. So again, it's up to the tool. It's basically embedding the tool's UI within the platform's UI to get content, quizzes, tests, assignments, content, chapters of books, whatever it is, into the platform's course outline, which is the standard case. It doesn't have to be a course outline, but that's the common case. So it doesn't have to just be LTI links. It could be a link to a file. It could be a link to an image resource or a YouTube resource or whatever. You can send multiple items back so that you don't have to pick one at a time. And again, we'll see some examples of that. You can specify that those items sent back are gradable items so that they will create a column in the gradebook or a line item. We use the term line item and gradebook column interchangeably in LTI. And then we have assignment and grade services, which allows you to add a line item, edit a line item, delete a line item, and get all of the line items. But only the ones that you are responsible for, not all of the line items, not all the gradebook columns in the course, only the ones that you have created either implicitly through deep linking or explicitly through the API. It's basically a RESTful API, so if you want to create a column that isn't associated with a link in the course outline, maybe it's an attendance or a participation grade that's got nothing to do with launching a particular resource, you can create that in the gradebook of the platform using what's basically a RESTful API. You can post and you can get the scores. And the endpoint for what to call to get back to that grade service is part of the initial LTI launch. This is the way LTI has always worked from the beginning. The initial launch sends you the URLs to get back to the platform. And last and least is the names and roles service, which is fairly straightforward. It's just a GET request that says, get me all the users in this course, and then possibly their role. It allows you to find out who has participated if they've never launched, because now you know who the users are and you know the zero state of their situation. In the future, we're going to add the ability to get which course groups those users are available, are a part of. So that will help you with that. It's a single URL. It's a simple payload that you get back an array of users, and optionally their personally identifiable information, which you can control at the institution level. And the idea is that it's extensible. We're sending JSON web tokens, and you can add new claims to JSON web tokens. We are going to be adding new capabilities as time goes on, such as the submission review launch, which allows you to, my internet connection is unstable, but it allows you to find out why was this grade given to the student that it was, and find out the details around that. As I mentioned, you can get groups for context and a lot of other things that we're working on in the future. And that is that. So now I'm going to, what am I going to do? I was going to draw a picture, but I don't have the picture. So let me go to, so can everybody hear me? Are there any questions? Are we all okay?
I can hear you. I think everyone else can too. Just so you get a response there.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Sometimes I end up talking to myself, which I like to do, but chat. All right. All right, cool. So from a Blackboard perspective, you would write a tool that meets the LTI specification. Ideally, you would work with the LTI reference implementation to kind of get your tool up and running. In my perfect world, you would also get it certified with the IMS certification suite to make sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. But at some point, you're going to need to get it working with the LMSs. And the whole point of standards is that you can write one tool that works with all the LMS platforms out there. Blackboard Learn just being one of them. And so, but there's a lot that we left out of the spec because it's challenging to specify some of these things. And the part that we left out of the spec is kind of the initial discovery and deployment of a tool. We talk about having tools generate public and private keys, and the platform generating public and private keys. We talk about these this OIDC flow. We talk about getting OAuth 2 bearer tokens, but we don't actually specify exactly how all of that is going to work. And so that's where the kind of implementation details come in. So what I'm going to continue with is kind of how you would integrate your specific tool with Blackboard, and then next time we'll look at some of the other LMSs. So the first thing you do with Blackboard is you go to what we call our developer portal, which is a central service that's been up for a few years. If you were to use our public REST API, if you want to use our public REST API to get a list of all the assignments or all the content in a course, or if you wanted to get a list of all the users in a course, you could use our public REST API, but it's a proprietary API, and all the other LMS vendors have their own proprietary REST API. And if you wanted to use that API, you would go to our developer portal and you would register an application, and you would be given a key and a secret. That's kind of the old school LTI 1.1 way of doing things, is that we give you a secret, you write it down, and then we throw it away, and you never let anybody else ever see it. We wanted to get away from that in an LTI so that we could use more of the asymmetric public-private key pair mechanism so that nobody is exchanging private keys or secrets anymore. But we thought, since our central service developer portal is already supporting the idea of registering your application, well, an LTI tool is just that application that also supports LTI. And so we enhanced our developer portal to basically support registering an LTI application, which you can then deploy to any number of institutions around the world. So this is a central service, lives in Amazon, AWS, and its job is to mint keys and manage the auth token process. So if I go into this developer portal, the production URL is developer.blackboard.com, and we have REST API. We have Swagger documentation for our REST APIs and a link to our community group. If I go in and manage my applications, I need to give it a name, so we'll say Bob, and this is Bob's application, and we'll say it's bob.com. You can have any number of domains that point to your single application, because a lot of people will host their application on multiple subdomains or even just multiple different completely top-level domains. And we support that here as we did with LTI 1.1. And then you need to provide a login initiation URL. This is part of that OpenID Connect third-party initiated login flow. So this is all part of that spec. It's talked about in the LTI specs. You have to enter it for the reference implementation. You have to enter it for the certification process. And this is a URL that's up to you. You make whatever this is. This just handles that initial OpenIDC Connect flow. There's no personally identifiable information going on here. This doesn't need to be a secured login. It just initiates that process so that we can make sure that you don't suffer from cross-site request forgery attempts. And then you need to give one or more redirect URLs. Basically, these are, again, part of that OpenID Connect flow is where the platform is then going to redirect back to after you start that initiation flow. So that would be whatever, again, you want to support, bob.com/LTI redirect. And then optionally within Blackboard, and I think other LMS providers support this, is that we can either mint your private key and public key pair for you if you don't feel comfortable minting your own asymmetric keys with the right security and encryption and all that jazz. Or we just added the capability where you can provide a JSON web key set URL where you provide your public key in a well-known, in a URL. So it's a public key so anybody can access it. And then you mint your own private key and store that privately and don't let anybody ever see it. And it's never written down on a napkin and it's never exchanged over email or copy and paste. So we'll type that at https://well-known/jwks.json. It can be whatever the URL you want it to be. And then you need to pick a signing algorithm. Blackboard only supports 2 currently, RS-256 and RS-512, but we can support other ones as time goes on. So this is the information that the platform needs to know about your tool. And this is all in the specification. There's nothing that we need to know that's outside of the specification. I mean, I guess the specification doesn't say that you need a name and a description, but those aren't a big stretch. So once you go to our developer portal and register your application, we generate a key and a secret. And these 2 things are for the REST API. Because the REST API that we developed 3 or 4 years ago uses a different authentication mechanism. It still uses OAuth 2, but it still uses a client credentials workflow. It doesn't use the same asymmetric key mechanism that LTI specified. If we were building our REST API today, we might go that route, but we built it 4 years ago, and this is what we landed on. We're going to change that eventually, but I don't know when. Then what you get is what we call an application ID, but in the LTI specs is the client ID. So those are interchangeable terms. I wish we would call it client ID throughout Blackboard, but we don't, because again, this was developed 4 years ago. The reason for client ID is that is the OpenID Connect terminology for identifying a client of the resource server. And then back in the spec for LTI, you need to know an issuer. You need to know a public key set URL, where to get our public key so that you can validate messages that we send you. You need an OAuth 2 token endpoint for where you get a token if you want to send messages back to us. So you can sign messages back to the platform. And then you need the OIDC auth request endpoint that is separate from the OAuth 2 token endpoint. These are different authorization requests. One's for the OIDC flow, one is for the OAuth 2 bearer token for making resource requests. And these are all part of the spec, but it looks like a bunch of craziness when you are just getting started. But these are all mandatory fields. These are the fields that the tool needs to copy, which is why you have the little copy button. You're going to copy and paste these into your tool configuration. So for example, we have written an open source tool that's a node-based tool that I'll get you the URL for, but I'm running it locally here. So this is my LTI tool that I'm running locally for testing, but it's an open source thing. You can run it, you can download it, run it. And you'll notice that I've got to have my interface is a little bit different, but it's basically the developer portal URL, which is really the kind of the base of where I'm talking to get tokens. The application ID or the client ID, my OAuth 2 token endpoint. The developer portal is really where the well-known URL for the JWKS, the public key set is. And I need to know where I go to authenticate the OpenID Connect flow, and I need to know my issuer because that's part of the JWT, so that I can validate that this is really coming from who I'm expecting it to. And last but not least, if I didn't provide my own JWKS URL, I need to paste in the private key. But I don't paste in the private key if I'm hosting my own public key at a JWKS URL and minting my own private key. So we're giving you both options there. So I save that in my tool, and I go back to my developer portal, and I save that here. It's actually been saved. And now I'm done. That tool, that application that you, the developer, have written now lives with Blackboard. And any institution running Blackboard Learn around the world can now use your tool. And they only need to know one piece of information. And that one piece of information is this application ID or client ID. They don't need to know domains. They don't need to know URL. They do need to know one URL, but we'll get into that. They don't need to know all the key and secret stuff. They don't need to know all this information exchange that we just talked about. That's between you and Blackboard. That's not between you and the institution. The institution wants to just be able to say, I want to use Turnitin or I want to use Cengage and be done with it. So now we go to Blackboard. And we go into Blackboard, and I have to just fake something here because I was trying to set up something else at the same time. Let me do this. So we go into Blackboard and ignore what I'm doing here because my internet connection is still unstable. We go into System Administrator to configure an application, an LTI tool with Blackboard. And we go into the administration tools, LTI tool providers, and we say register an LTI 1.3 tool. If you had an LTI 1.1 tool, you would register it here. The label's a little confusing. It just says register provider domain. We're gonna change that someday. But I would go and register an LTI 1.3 tool, and all I have to know is that client ID. Oops, wrong copy and paste. Let me go back here and get that client ID and paste that in here. And I say submit. And there's all the information that the tool developer entered. It's read-only at this point, but I generated a deployment ID on the fly because I just deployed this tool to Blackboard Learn. I've got the URLs, but I can't change them now because that's really defined by the application. I can say whether this tool is approved or not. I can give it some custom parameters. Yes, Claude, I just added that. And then I can have some institution policies around what personally identifiable information to send and whether we want to support grade service access and whether we want to support membership service or names and roles service access. Now notice I talked about scopes before. With Blackboard, we just made the decision that you get all or nothing with grades. So you get read and write access or you get nothing. So that is up to an institution to decide, but the rest of these values up here, except for the tool status and the custom parameters, are read-only what the tool defines. Now we're not going to continue with Bob because that was a fake domain, but you'll see that I've already set up this LTI Advantage testing tool for LTI 1.3, and if I go in and edit it, you can see that it's going to take a while. And I've got a deployment ID, I've got a login initiation URL, tool redirect URLs, custom parameters, and institution policies already set up.
Eric,
now, the one thing that the system administrator needs to do with pretty much any LMS today, although I think we're working on figuring out how we can make this a standards way to do it, is to configure what we call an LTI placement. Where is the link to this LTI tool going to be placed within the UI of Blackboard Learn? It might be as part of adding an item to a course outline. It might be a course level tool that's got nothing to do with the course outline itself. It's not something, it might be a calculator, or it might be a portfolio tool, or it might be a discussion about the course. It's not really necessarily in the outline of the course due step 1, step 2, step 3. There are other places within Learn, such as the administration panel, or such as at a system-wide level outside the context of a course, where you might want to have an LTI tool. And so we support that. So we basically support 4 different kinds of placements. And so now I have to go to manage placements. Probably the most common type of placement is a deep linking placement, which allows you to launch to the tool, select content, to then get added back into the course. So if I look at that placement, I got to give it a name and a handle and whether it's available or not. And really, these are my choices of types. Is it a course tool that's outside the course outline? Is it a course tool that's inside the course outline? It's course content. Is it a system-wide tool that potentially anybody can access but outside the context of a course? Or is it just for system administrators? And then you can ignore this last one. It's a kind of an internal use case for other special partners. I can specify whether to launch it in a new window. If you don't check that, we launch it in an iframe. So your tool has to be allowed to be launched or hosted in an iframe. And so you can't try to break out of the iframe, and you can't try to do, non-secure things within your iframe. If your tool doesn't support running inside of an iframe, then just pick the launch new window button. And then we need a URL and some optional custom parameters. So this is the one place where a Learn system administrator needs to know a URL. In the future, what I would like us to see as a community, as a standards body, is figure out how we can kind of predefine this information in a standards way, because most of this is really up to the tool vendor. Certainly the URL is up to the tool vendor. The where it gets placed within my platform UI, that's a little trickier, but even that might have some standard guidance around it. So we'll look at that in the coming months and years of LTI. So now I'm logged in as an admin. I'm going to log in as an instructor. Now that placement, that tool has been deployed to my institution, the placement has been defined, I'm going to go into a course, and I have 2 courses. One is an original Learn, Blackboard Learn comes with 2 user experiences. One is the, quote, original user experience that's been around for 15 plus years. And the other is our new lovely Ultra user experience that's been around for 4 or 5 years. So we'll start with the Ultra. So here I log in, I go to my course, and this is my course outline. I've got tools over here that are outside of the outline, and I could have some LTI links inside of here. If I go to View Course and Institution Tools, I don't have any, but I could put some that would show up here that are generic LTI tools. Or if I want an LTI tool to be part of my course outline, I go into my content market, which gives me access to our partner cloud and our LTI tools. And I pick my LTI Advantage Deep Link with 2 N's. Now this is the testing tool that we have developed at Blackboard that's open source. It's running in Node, and it's running on my computer. No, nothing up my sleeve. It's running right here. And I've even got debug output for it. And then we've built, as part of this tool, a way to create deep linking results back. So I can say I want 1 LTI link, or I can say I want 2. I can say I want a content link. I can say I want 5 images to show up, or I can just enter JSON, raw deep linking content JSON if I want to. I'm just going to pick 1 LTI link for now. I hit submit. Before it sends it back to the platform, and this tool should work with any LMS platform, by the way. I've not certified it with IMS, but I will one of these days soon. I print out the JSON that I'm going to send back. This is the JSON that a deep linking response looks like. So I've got a resource link. I've got some information about that link. I've got the fact that it's a line item, what the score maximum is, the chapter 12 quiz. So I can use this as a really rich testing tool for getting things to work with a platform. This is the request that came in from the deep link, so I can debug the request that came in from Learn, just figure out why I'm not handling something right, and then I can say return this back to Learn. And now what's happened is we've inserted a new content item into the course outline. And we had a title for it, and it's got a gradebook column. If I go over to our gradebook, we created a gradebook column, chapter 12 quiz, right there. And now if I launch that link as an instructor, I've got basically, this is the launch that I got. We've expanded, we've unencoded we've decoded the JWT, we verified the signature, and now we've printed out the JSON that we got back. And I can now go and I can check my names and roles, and I can see that I've got 5 members in the course. I've got Sue, I've got Joe, I've got Eric, and I've got Bob the grader, and I've got facilitator. I was checking different roles that we send. So I can do my names and roles service from here. I can actually, this is new code that's probably not in production yet, but we're working on a new group spec. So I can say these are all the course groups that those users that are part of that course, and then with that course group ID, I can get the users that are in that course. And then last but not least, I can get the assignments and grades. So let me actually do that. I can, well, first let's go and read the columns. So I can read the columns, and I say I've got 7 grade columns, and the first one is that one that was created for the deep link. But if I go back to names and roles, and I see who my members are, and I say Sue, so her user ID is this. If I copy that user ID and go back to assignment and grades, and I say, I'm going to send Sue a score of 22 for that launch. So that launch was for a particular resource link. That's this resource link here. So we're going to grade that resource link. If I had a manually created column, I could enter the column ID here. So I'm going to send the score. It tells me what I got back from the post back to Learn. So I had to get an OAuth2 token, then I had to make a request to the grade service in Learn, which is this URL here, and I can send a grade. Now if I go out of the tool and I'm back into my grade book, whoops, I put something. I can see that Sue has a 22 for that grade column. So that's pretty cool. So let me go back to assignment. Oops, I always do that. Let me go back to the launch, go to assignment and grades. I'm going to create a column, and I'm going to say the max score is 77, and the name is my column. Well, let's get more. We'll say attendance. Attendance. I spelled it wrong, of course. And we'll add the column, and it says it added that column. Now let's go back to my grade book. And look, there's the attendance grade. And that is not associated with a line item, but it's now in my grade book, right? So that's pretty cool. If I go back to my course outline, relaunch the tool, I say that, oh yeah, let me go to, so I've still got Susie. Let's get Susie's user ID again. Let's save it off over here. And I'll go back to assignment and grades, and I'll get my columns. So this is my attendance grade column, right? And so this is the column ID is actually this right here. I'm not sure this will work, but let me try it. So we're gonna set this for the column ID. We'll set a score of 66, and we'll set a user ID of Susie. And we'll send the score, and that might have worked. So we'll go back to my grade book, and we'll say there's one to grade and one to post, and we'll look at that. And Susie got a 66 out of 77, which means she's got a 50.82 score. So pretty much that LTI tool, you don't have to use that tool. I think it's really handy, but of course it's handy for me because I'm developing the platform. But the point is that it exercises all the LTI Advantage capabilities. And so if you're struggling with getting your tool to work with Learn, we've got videos on our community site of how to configure, go through all the steps that I just went through. We've got sample code that shows you how it works, and you've got a sample application that you can use with Learn to prove that, you know, and see what JSON is being sent back and forth. So that's really the end of my presentation for now, and you're all grateful, I'm sure. I didn't realize that went for as long as it did. So we can take questions, or we can go and do something else.
There's been quite a conversation going on in the chat, Eric, and
sorry,
so,
I did not read
no,
anything.
no, it's no. There were other people responding, and so
I think everything got answered. Did any of the questions in there not get answered? We can make Eric answered it live.
Where is where we can find the source code for that test?
Oh yeah,
very
so
great.
let me. That is right here. So I'll paste that here. But there are a number of open source tools. There's a PHP one that Martin developed that is Martin from Turnitin, but that's on the IMS Global GitHub account that you can have access to. I believe if you're a member, you can get access to the reference implementation as well. So there are a couple of other tools out there if Node is not your favorite language of choice. And I know, Claude, you were working on you had a Python version running. I don't know if you've kept it maintained. But.
Yeah, it was more a Jupyter Notebook bootcamp, so it was really meant to serve the notebook. So it was not a general purpose one. It's more like a, so yeah. So it's different. It's kind of same idea, but not as a general tool. Also, so GWKS URI, do you know? Do you have any idea how much time it's going to take to be available on the actual developer portal?
So that's more. So I finished the coding a couple weeks ago. It's a question of deploying it and getting through kind of some channels. There's some process I've got to go through. I imagine that'll be in the next couple of weeks, but I don't want to promise anything because a lot of that's kind of out of my hands. But I know that we haven't had any partners that say they can't work with us without that, but I know that people like you and many others know that they want that. So that's why I went ahead and developed that. The code is done. It's a matter of getting it deployed. We have to deploy to Learn, and we have to deploy to the developer portal, which is that central service. So there's kind of a chicken and egg problem going there too, because I don't want to deploy it to the developer portal until people have Learn supporting that, because if they think they can use the JWKS URL and their Learn instance doesn't support it, then it's not going to be a very happy experience.
Okay, makes sense. Yes. So actually, someone on the chat is actually eager to get that. So that it saves having a private key on the pair, because if you deploy the tool, if you deploy multiple tools but that point to the same basically backend, you would have to have a different private key now. Whereas in that case, you can serve the same public key.
Well, Wade Weichel, who is the product manager for this and who is on the call, is the guy that whomever wants that JWKS URL support, they should talk to him and ask nicely, and he will prioritize that. There, I just threw Wade under the bus. You're welcome, Wade.
I've been responding on the chat anyway, so that's good. Okay.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions for Eric, Blackboard?
Oh, so yes. So, well, no, that I just saw the question using deep linking 2.0 return an iframe to the text editor. So yes, that's with Learn, and I wish I had more time to demo that, and that's what I was going to try to demo with Kaltura, but I didn't have my demo set up. Yes, that is possible with our Ultra experience to do that, and that's been in production for about a year now. What you need to do, and I can show you at least what you need to do, is, if I'm still sharing my screen, for deep linking 3, you need to basically set this iframe property in your JSON that you send back, and that will tell us to embed it. That's what will tell us to embed it in the text editor. So if you go to Ultra, let me show you how that would work real quick. You go to Ultra and you're going to create a discussion. So go to participation and engagement, create a discussion. What I can do from here is I can say insert LTI item, and it will take me back to that content market, and then I can insert my deep link. Unfortunately, my tool doesn't support embedded stuff right now, so this won't actually work, but I'll fix that in the testing tool. But I've gotten that to work with Kaltura and Panopto and others. The problem is that this text editor is a different text editor than we have for our original experience, which is a much older version of TinyMCE, and we're replacing that editor in early 2020 or sometime in 2020. So we'll support that in our original experience, but right now we only support it for the Ultra experience. Any other questions?
I guess I maybe have more of just a quick comment. Eric highlighted the reference implementations, other tools that you can be using for development and testing. When you do reach that point in time, if you wanted to do some testing specifically against Blackboard Learn, if you're in the developer portal already, there's a link to the developer community. You can register there, and within there are AWS AMI images. So if you wanted to, spin up a developer environment to do some testing against, you can do so. And the information for doing so is available again in that developers community. So, more resources there for you to do kind of your final go-to-market planning as you get done with your, development, implementation, certification, and just want to see how that's going to work and behave within Blackboard Learn. Those resources are there and available for you.
So actually, I am using the Kaltura. This is their UI, and I just got it working just in time before this demo. So now I've just embedded a video that I'm hosting at Kaltura inside my text editor. It takes a little while to load that video the first time around, and it's being processed, so that's going to take a while. So we may run out of time, but you can tell that I've got an iframe that just did an LTI launch within this text editor. In fact, I can just hit save here, and it will relaunch that. But then when I log in as a student to look at that discussion board, the video will just render inside the iframe, and there it is. I can play it, and I don't have to click on a link to go to that video. So we've supported that in Learn for about a year. Oh, sorry, I got my volume turned way up high here. But like I said, we're working on that for the original experience, but it works in the Ultra experience.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric. Thanks for the helpful demo and for the questions that were raised. I think those are all good. Help us understand, what assumptions are being made and how people are using these specifications, LTI Advantage services in their own environments. So we'll continue next month's meeting, the roundtable in October, to do some further demos as well. I realize we're short on time. We have 5 minutes left, and there were a few questions that came through our form submission. I think and I've pasted them in our notes. So if you still have the agenda document open and you want to look at what those questions are, there was one about the cross-site request forgery vulnerability. I think that's more to do with LTI 1.1. So that we'll consider addressing that topic in a future session where we can talk more about the previous version of LTI. There was a question, I think this is what...
However, just on that one, what we can say is that, as Eric pointed out earlier on, the fact that we adopt OpenID Connect and it has a baked-in functionality, because that's why we do this dance with the browsers that goes first to the tools and back to the platform, and from the platform back to the tool is to go around this vulnerability. So it's been addressed with LTI 1.3. And there is a similar flow that's been implemented on LTI 1.1 with LTI 1.1.2, I think. It's to force a dance. So not just you learn from the platform to the tool, but from the platform to the tool and back to the platform and to the tool, so that it allows to mark the browser as the one originating the LTI launch. So something like that.
Okay. I think there was a question about why a platform can't be certified, why a platform can be certified without implementing all the options of the standard. The examples are Moodle not allowing a text editor placement, and then I think similar to what you just addressed, Eric, about embedding an iframe with deep link, and you showed the workaround for that with the Ultra. Claude, do you have any comment about the Moodle text editor placement?
Yes, well, the ability of where you can place yourself has never been part of the specification. So it's been a common ground that you at least can put links into the main course outline. But the fact that you can add LTI links to a rich text editor has never been explicitly mentioned as a required capability of a platform. And there's been work on the working group, possibly to try to define, to better get around the vocabulary of where things can show up, and we've called that placements. But this really varies greatly across platforms, so it's pretty hard to standardize and mandate a platform must support LTI launches into rich text editor. So we've never been that far. What we are saying is that a platform must support adding links, to the main to your course, I guess. But exactly where, that's not been specified. It's platform specific. Some very specialized platform might not even have this idea of rich text editor, or it might not even make sense in that specific context.
Another question was, the client ID and deployment ID are optional in the request. Why? Could easily be required, and it would make tools simpler to implement.
So what was that one again?
Client ID and deployment ID are optional in the request, and the question is why it would make life simpler for tools to implement.
Yeah, I was surprised because they're not.
I can answer that one if you want.
Okay.
So the reason behind it being optional was it was actually quite a late addition to the 1.3 specification. It would have required some major breakage of some existing implementations if we'd made it required at that point. Yeah, it is a little bit of a pain. The reason why we didn't put it in straight away was because in the early process of developing the OpenID Connect flow, we wanted to avoid kind of diverting off that flow too much and adding too much custom kind of extra parameters, extra things into the OpenID Connect flow itself, because that requires more security review, more checks around that to make sure that we're not introducing any more problems to it. So yes, it would be nice if it was mandatory. I believe a number of platforms are sending that data. I know Blackboard do. Yeah, hopefully the adoption on it is more of a recommended than an optional.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I missed that, but yes. So there's a bit of tension because we want it to be OpenID as much as possible, and if we start mandating something like that, we're diverging from the core specification we try to lean on. So it's a bit of a tension there, you know. So it's good feedback to know that that you're not you could have made that use of that. And so if all platforms end up supporting it, then we might revisit that, I guess, eventually. So.
All right, thank you for that. There's, with just about out of time, there was a question about the process for becoming LTI Advantage certified. We've covered that in a little bit in previous roundtables, so you can see some other recordings if you go to the Roundtable Resources Forum, where you can access other recordings. Derek, our certification engineer, is also preparing a more kind of a formal official recording of the LTI Advantage conformance certification process. So there's a specific video that will guide you through those steps, and you can kind of see a preview of it. And then there was a request or a question about someone going over the details of the OpenID flow. So maybe we spend a little bit more time covering that next meeting. We'll huddle with the chairs.
Claude has a really good video for that. We could send out really quick too.
Yeah, that'd be great if someone has a quick reference for it. And with that, I think we should end the meeting here, as we've eclipsed our hour by a minute or two. So thank you everyone for your attendance, participation. Kara's been requesting feedback, so if you have some ideas for ways we can make further improvements to this meeting and the format we use here, that would be great. And we'll look forward to meeting again with you all in October.